So the GSC reinforcements are out, and I have got the new Warlord Szenari. Don't ask me to pronounce her first name, because I have no idea. Look guys, I am going to probably do a range of different deck guides, but to be honest with you, I don't have all the cards yet. So what I've done is I've gone in for the Warlord as the first thing from the raid, and I have built a Sabotage heavy base deck around the new Warlord. So let's dive in and take a look what that looks like. Alright, here it is. So what are we trying to do with this deck? Well, quite simply, we are trying to completely flood our opponent's hand with Sabotage cards, being generally as annoying as hell and disrupting their entire game plan. And obviously, through use of things like the Underground Network, the new Cut Them Off spell, we're able to essentially do this in a way where our opponent just can't keep up. Previously, they could just kind of play a Sabotage card out of the hand every time you put one in, and it was a little bit annoying. It just kind of slowed them down. Whereas now they literally fall behind if that's their strategy. So I really think Sabotage is becoming has probably reached a point where it's very powerful and quite oppressive in any game that kind of doesn't end very quick, and that's because of those two cards particularly. And then of course what that makes suddenly is a card we've had for a long time, which is a Trap Sprung. This card is just absolutely bonkers now, guys. Like, it's always been like either a bad card or a kind of meh okay card. Now it's phenomenal. It's quite often the case that this thing does 18 to 21 damage in a game. Like, don't be surprised if you're doing that. Of course, it's random effect, so it can take out stealth units. It can act as a finisher and just burning your opponent down. It's really quite savage. So let's quickly run through the deck and have a look at what else is in there. Obviously, Szenari herself, I think it's a she. She comes with 35 health. And her new ability is kind of interesting, right? Because it gives the +1 to range. Okay, no, nothing too spectacular there. Lots of Warlords do that. But by having Sniper, it means that we get to trade without taking damage. Now, that's important in itself, because trading with your Warlord and not taking damage is going to help you in games where you actually want to go the distance. Often we lose a lot of a lot of our Warlord's health because we are trying to remove our opponent's troops. So doing that not for free, because obviously we pay 2 energy, but what I mean is free in terms of health. That's kind of interesting. So the other effect is, if we slay, that we create a random Sabotage in enemy hands. So it makes our opponent really scared to play low to the ground units, which particularly if let's say our opponent's approach is to play aggro against us, because that's a good way of countering other Sabotage decks, but it doesn't work against this one as well, because this one obviously can then remove those units. So yeah, really interesting deck. Now I've actually gone down to just a single Gene Stealer familiar. I kind of found that this has obviously still got the usual kind of combo with Sanctus and things like that, but I felt like I feel like 2's too many. I don't really need it in this type of deck. I've got a single Perfect Ambush, because of course, why wouldn't you? And then we're really trying to load it up on the Sabotage deck, so on the Sabotage card. So we have the 2 backstabs, we have the 2 clandestine operations. What else have we got? Obviously, Biophagus can put a poison supplies in our opponent's hand on E3. We have the double Cut Them Off. This card, guys, once you play this on 3, putting 2 3-drops in the hand and Underground Network on 4, turning both of those into 4-drops plus whatever Underground Network puts in, they can't recover from that in terms of emptying the hand. They're always going to have traps in their hand. So horrendous combination, those 2 on 3 and 4. And it kind of forces your opponent into this kind of like just ignore them game plan. I do run the Living Icon. I've got to be honest, like, this is a card that I am not sure about in this deck. Living Icon's a really interesting card. It's in a very weird spot. Why am I not 100% sure? I really am. I really have considered dropping it, because there's a lot of things fighting for the 3 space in this deck, right? Like, we'd probably rather play Biophagus. We'd probably rather play Cut Them Off. So I just feel like it's a little bit slow in what it's doing, and also it's not necessarily playing into the game plan of the deck. That's just been my experience. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. But I really found myself like confused almost when I've had this card. So, but it's currently in the deck. I do run a single neophyte trooper because we don't have tons of troops in the deck, but what this can do is just give me that really important kind of like emergency clear for quite cheap. It also combos quite well. You know, if this is, for example, flanking for 3 range attack, and then you can get 3 range sniper from your warlord, so it can help you take out medium-sized units, finishing with your warlord and stuff. So that's basically why I have one of those in there. Obviously the specialists are putting in Sabotage into our opponent's hands, so loads of stuff for that. The Locust is quite good still because it does help us, it does help slow our opponent down. So even though it doesn't necessarily put a Sabotage card in, it does slow them down. If, for example, their big idea is to try and beat us down, well, Locust can kind of counter that game plan. I've already talked about the trap sprung. This is an absolutely critical card in this build. Like, you have to run 2 of these. It will win you most games. Clamoverse is interesting because I do find that this card is relatively average in most builds. However, in this one, I think you've got to run 2 because, again, not only does it slow down, notice like Locust and this both slow down, but the other thing it does is it gives you another access to cheap Sabotage. And again, when you're playing Underground Network, that is a good thing. Ridge Runner, more removal and access to Sabotage. The Saboteur is just a great card, obviously a good combination to all of these spells that we've got in the deck. The Telepathic is an alternative win condition. I pretty much run this in just about every single GSC build. You can drop it, or if you don't own it, I don't think you need to worry. This deck would work just as fine without it, and there's very few games that it actually does win you the game, but it is an alternative win con. If you've got your opponent down to a low amount of health, they really can't play a unit, because you just steal it with this and end the game. And of course, for a little bit more excitement, we have the Patriarch. The Patriarch is just, you know, quite frankly, horrendous in this deck, because obviously you have all of the spells in your opponent's hand, and therefore the Patriarch, don't be surprised if it's only costing you 5 to get out, because it's just reduced by 1 for every card in the enemy hand. Now, there is an argument to say, like, if you wanted to, in terms of, you know, if you don't have any of the Legendaries, or if you wanted to drop the Living Icon, or you wanted to drop the Neophyte Trooper, you could put another Familiar in, just because the Patriarch and Sanctus are both obviously good combos for it. So, you know, like, it's up to you. That would be a reasonable change, to be honest. But overall, I'm sort of like 95% happy with this deck. I think it's a really powerful deck, to be honest, right now. Really confusing for your opponent, because do they try and beat you down? You've got to know, you know, you're looking for your Clamoverses and your Locuses, and your Warlord ability to take out the cheap troops if they want to play a long game. Well, obviously that plays nicely into what we're trying to do with the Sabotage. So, yeah, it's pretty potent, guys. It does very, very well. I think, you know, if you want to kind of do well against this deck, things like the Necron Scarab deck, things like Gordrang can do quite well. But other than that, like, this is quite nicely positioned right now in the meta. I really don't think it has a ton of bad matchups. Sylar occasionally can beat it down, although I think it's a pretty decent matchup against Sylar, because we have good ways to remove a lot of their units as well. But like I say, maybe Gordrang, the Scarab deck, and maybe even things like the Nexus combo sometimes can kind of like just finish this off quick. But overall, I would say that this is a really, really powerful deck right now, and is just very, very well positioned in the meta. Now, in terms of the Mulligan, you just want to make sure that you know what you're playing against. If you're coming up against something that's quite beatdowny, I would look to keep things like Locust, potentially I would even keep what's it called, Clamoverse, just because they are very good at slowing our opponent down. But otherwise, I generally, with this type of build, I actually really do want to get the Sabotage going early. So sometimes I'll even throw away a hand that has, like, you know, Locust into Nexus, into Clamoverse or something like that, because what I'm wanting to do is just get the Sabotage out, and So something like, you know, Operation, into Cut Them Off, into Underground Network, I would say is like a pretty perfect opener, especially because then you could play like Biophagus on E5 with a 2-drop like a Hero Power or a Backstab, and that can just put, after Underground Network, that can just put so many traps in your opponent's hand that it's Sabotages. It's just disgusting. Really, really horrendous. So yeah, that is the deck. I'm not sure about the Patriarch in terms of like whether I keep it in my opening hand or not, to be honest. I think it depends on the quality of the other cards. Maybe if we're going second and you've got the extra card, I probably would keep it. But if we were going first and we only have 3 cards, maybe I'd keep it if I had something like Cut Them Off and Underground Network, for example, and that was the 3rd card. So you've got to kind of assess the quality of your hand before you do it. Okay, so with that said, let's jump into a couple of games and see how this game gets on. I will say I am showing you some replays because I had about 5 games with this deck where my opponent just kind of quit after E4, E5. They just sort of saw the writing on the wall and they just resigned. And I kind of thought, do I just keep those in? But I thought they're probably not that useful to watch. But essentially that's just getting a really good Sabotage opener and your opponent just going, do you know what, I'm out of here. Okay, let's take a look at some games. Alrighty, Sabotage Zen. If you like this, guys, don't forget to hit that thumbs up below. Subscribe to the channel. It's all appreciated. So in this particular mulligan, we're just going to keep the perfect ambush because it's not great. Okay, so we have got the Infinity Circuit, meaning that we can drop the Biophagus straight off of the bat, which is quite a nice, well, it's a very nice start if you're going first. So here we go, we drop the Biophagus, and that's a Poison Supplies in hand. Now, Anvir is interesting, because obviously Anvir is the only Warlord who has an option to just basically get rid of this and put it back into his deck. But instead he goes with the stealth counter. You counter stealth by playing your own stealth. Okay, so we tried to look for the getting away, and obviously didn't get that card as an option there. A little bit unlucky on our opponents, from their perspective. Now, what exactly are we going to do here? Because we don't have a great option unless we draw something, and we don't. So it's probably just going to be a Biohorrors, look for something to help with a setup. And actually, we just take the Resilience, and we just kind of try and make the most of the body that we've got. In these hands, like, where you're just awkward and you just don't really have a particularly good curve, just trying to make this last and get as much value out of it as possible. Now, he has got a good answer here. He decides to trade in and get the stone. You could have done it the other way around, but obviously he valued the stone more than keeping that guy alive. And yeah, a little bit awkward because... so it would have been awkward with the 3 health. However, he left the Poison Supplies in, and that means we get him down to 2, so we can now backstab that and get another another Sabotage into his hand. But again, you can see that in this game, like it's been a bit awkward, right? The curve wasn't great in terms of what we drew. So he decides to just play out the Cult Propaganda. It's only costing 2, so he just takes a turn to basically empty his hand of our spells and use his Path of the Seer. Okay, so we do find Cut Them Off, which is kind of nice. This card is very, very good because I feel like this is a card where once you play this, this is where they start to give up on the idea of clearing their hand every turn. Of course, we are playing Anvir, so he has a different way of clearing it. He can just put it back in his deck. Now, he goes with Double Scorpion here, and I kind of wondered about potentially playing a Trap Sprung and just trying to kind of clear these. But obviously, we drew the network, so I kind of got a little bit greedy and decided, you know what? I'm going to go in and play that straight away. And I don't think we actually attack here because I'm very nervous about what state of my health is going to be after this turn. Now, he does get rid of the Jam Communication. He's probably not going to bother with these 2. He plays the Mask instead. Really good counter. Anything that stuns, I think things like Jane Zar is probably a good counter to this Warlord because of the stun ability. Things like Gordrang want to be playing the double stun. Yeah, just stun overall is a very, very good ability, and it has been for a few seasons now, but it's very good against this Warlord. So it's getting a bit desperate here, right? Like, we really don't have much health, and considering we're playing Eldar and we know about the reach with things like the Wailing Doom, this is looking a little bit scary at the minute. So we go ahead and we play that Gene Stealer, and we kind of the Familiar, and that gives us a nice kind of combat mechanic there. Obviously, he does pick up 2 stones, and he actually gets rid of the improvised barricade. Interesting. Obviously, this we made invulnerable for a turn with the perfect ambush, so he didn't have an option to take that out this turn. So maybe that's why he used the turn to kind of just clear his hand. He'll be conscious of a trap sprung. He has done pretty well actually, clearing some of the spells. But here we can put another spell into his hand, of course. This is the problem playing against this deck. If you put anything down that's got low health, you're just asking for a Sabotage card. And we just hit face. So we're kind of like very even on health now. What has he got? Okay, so does everything to get rid of the Saboteur, and of course he's going to, knowing what this is, he's going to hit the range attack to get rid of that. And he plays his own kind of setting up for lethal. Now we actually do play this, the trap is sprung, and what happens here is we basically end up missing the Scorpion Exarch, but because we had the Nexus down, it did give us enough damage to do lethal. So it was like a case of we were either going to do lethal or we were going to clear his lethal. That was the kind of like the idea of that play. GG. Okay, so we're going to keep Cut Them Off and Biophagus here. Now, potentially could have kept the Patriarch just because we're going second and we've got the extra card. Our opponent's got a little bit more of a kind of beat down type of deck. We haven't got a lot going on here on the first turn, but what we are going to be able to do in this game is play the Sabotage opening, as I'm calling it, which is the, well, almost the Sabotage opening. We didn't have the turn 2 one, but, you know, we can basically play Cut Them Off into Underground Network. Or you can do the Biophagus into Underground Network and then play Cut Them Off on E5. Kind of very similar effect, really. The difference mainly here is that this kind of gives them an opportunity to clear this, but it kind of ruins this. It disrupts the tempo. So it kind of depends what you need to do there. Now, I did want to disrupt the tempo, so. Now we actually decide, because of this awkwardness where he's kind of got the heal, we actually decide not to play the Underground Network. Instead we use our power and we just go ahead and use the Idol to be able to play Cut Them Off now. Was kind of like a delayed last turn, but now he's got 3 Sabotage in hand, ready for the big Underground Network. So how's everybody been finding this Warlord? Have you unlocked it so far in the raid? Let me know in the comments if you've been playing with it. Kind of interested in what other people have been doing with him. Obviously, we haven't done the Biker Gang yet. I will be doing that deck guide once I get all the cards, once the raid has ended. But yeah, keen to know what other people are doing with this guy as well. Guy, girl, you know what I mean. Alright, so he's starting to put a little bit of stuff in our hand now as well. And we obviously can just, there's quite a few things we could do here, but we decide to actually just get rid of that and just go ahead and underground network here because we can remove it with a warlord. Obviously we could have played Ridge Runner, but as I had an opportunity to remove with a warlord, I'd rather save the Ridge Runner for something that my warlord can't remove. And that's the thinking of how I kind of prioritize that. So you see he's kind of reached the point now where he's kind of ignoring getting those out of his hand, and that's kind of what this does now. This is kind of why I think Sabotage has become so potent. So we're going to do this thing here where we're actually just going to drop this and play the perfect ambush, right? And say, well, you can't really do much here. I mean, he could do things like telepathic domination on us, but he wouldn't win the game with it. Instead, he actually just goes ahead and plays the Nexus. We go down to 16, so he's setting up potential lethal here. So we obviously hit with the Ridge Runner, and that now puts a fourth thing in hand, and now we're going to put a fifth in hand. This gives us 18 damage with the trap sprung, guys. So we're going to go for it, and again, what I'm thinking here is I either clear this or I kind of set up lethal. And what's going on here? We've done 3. We've done 4. We've done 5. Now, God knows 6. God knows how that happens. Like, how on a 50-50, 6 times in a row you hit the same one. So you could say we got lucky in ending the game there. Okay, guys, so there you go. That is the Sabotage Zen deck. I think you could play this with Safa. I think you could play, to be honest, probably with any of the other warlords. But I think what Zen gives you, they all have different pros and cons, right? But what Zen gives you is a good counter to aggro decks. Like, if people are thinking they're just going to beat down your Sabotage deck, then Zen gives you like good removal against those early game smaller units that your opponent might use in an aggro deck. So I think that's the main advantage of Sven. I'm not sure whether it's better than Safa overall or not, but it's certainly, like I say, got that advantage in helping you with removal and dealing with the board, which sometimes the Safa version can struggle with. And we've already talked about alternative cards and whatnot. So yeah, go ahead and give this a shot, guys. It's really fun. It's not so much fun for your opponent, I'm not gonna lie. Like, this disruption Sabotage thing is gonna get tired. It's going to get bored very quickly of playing against it, I think, if we have a whole season of it. But certainly playing with it, like, I definitely think the Sabotage archetype works now. And that's been up for debate for some time. So if that's your thing, guys, hope you enjoyed this. Hit that thumbs up below. And let me know how you get on with your version of Sabotage Zen. I'll see you in the next one.